Hi, welcome to ThreatTraq Essentials. We're going to take a look at the stories we covered on this week's ThreatTraq and see what everyday cybersecurity lessons we can get out of them. I'm here with Ken Walsh. How you doing, Ken?
I'm doing well, Don. How are you?
Great to see you again. Let's talk about this week's stories. John Hogaboom brought us a story about malware that's been discovered on Macs. And we usually don't think of Macs as being susceptible to malware. We don't talk about it a lot. So tell me a little bit about this mysterious malware.
So about, I think John had said a week or two ago, some analysts had discovered that there was a new malware strain that was found on these Mac devices. And as you've mentioned, it's not that it's impossible to get malware on a Mac. It's just a little less frequent, partly doing just the number of PCs versus the number of Macs. But these researchers found that there were a couple different variants of this malware. One for the, I don't necessarily even want to call it an older Mac, but the pre-November 2020 Mac, and Macs that have been, in technology, I suppose it is these days. But, you know, that's only a few months ago. And to have a new processor in November and to now already have a new malware strain with about 30,000 total potentially infected devices, it's really interesting to see. And John had talked about it, and we couldn't really see, or the researchers who found this really couldn't see what necessarily the end goal was, just that this malware had landed somehow on about 30,000 machines. It's not fully known how the malware got there. Maybe a theory could be through malvertising, where whether you click on a malicious link or there's malware that's somehow inserted into the advertising stream. But it's unknown yet what the full purpose is, but perhaps by these researchers bringing this to light, maybe it reduces or allows endpoint security companies, or if you have an endpoint security on your Mac, to get signatures updated so you can know, are you infected or are you vulnerable?
So we're not sure what it's doing or how it got there, but is there some general principles in the meantime we can give Mac users to follow to protect themselves?
Yeah, I think that one argument that I feel like even for the last almost 10, 15 years I've been having with people is they say, oh, I have a Mac, I can't get a virus or malware. And that's just not true. You might be able to avoid getting something that's targeted towards maybe a Windows device or potentially an Android device, but there can still be malware that's geared specifically towards Macs. So whether it's having an antivirus suite on your computer or your Mac that is then able to, now that the knowledge is out there about this, to detect the signatures, and sometimes it's even just knowing, okay, internet surfing, going to legitimate websites, not that that makes you immune to something like malvertising, but maybe it makes you a little less susceptible then, because hopefully then it's a more reputable advertising stream that you're getting into.
Now, Kim Withers brought us a story about TDoS, not DDoS, but TDoS. Tell me what that is and what happened in this particular instance.
So with TDoS, you can think of that as telephony or telephone DOS, a denial of service. And what we see with that is, I'll say someone, but it could be groups of someone, are potentially going to be abusing and spoofing phone calls to a victim. In the case of Kim's article, it was emergency responders. And you get so overloaded at your call center that's receiving these calls, or maybe it's the local building where everyone does work that does get these calls, and they get such a volume that it makes it difficult for a legitimate call to get through, or potentially any call to get through. So it makes it, in the scenario that Kim presented, it's a little more frightening of a scenario. I know John also had mentioned that there were scenarios that something with TDoS could be applied to bank fraud, or just other scenarios where you might have some kind of two-factor that involves a phone call to you, or maybe just calling into some kind of large data center. So it's not just applicable to emergency responders scenarios.
So is there a way that organizations with phone systems can protect themselves from attacks like this?
Yeah, so it's not quite as easy as with our scenario before with something like malware and you have an antivirus. One thing you could do is just make sure that you have an auditable call log, so that if you do experience something like this, you can turn over a call log to, in this case, the FBI, and then they can do analysis on something like that. On the other side of it, it can be a little more, it can be difficult too from us as a cybersecurity professional. When someone is spoofing those phone numbers, it can become very difficult to find where they're necessarily originating from. So it can be a very frustrating scenario.
Finally, let's talk about your story. It was a little different. It wasn't so much about some new malware vulnerability or threat. It was about the interaction of psychology and cybersecurity, specifically psychological traits that come into play for those of us working in cybersecurity. Tell me about it.
So this article referred to a phrase or a soft skill called cognitive readiness. And what that has to do with is one's ability to adapt within a situation. How do you incorporate your problem-solving skills, your decision-making skills, your situational awareness of what's going on around you, and how do all of those then play together to allow you to deal with a scenario that either you aren't necessarily were aware that maybe could happen, or a scenario that perhaps you weren't expecting. So it kind of all goes back to the philosophy of continual learning, right? Where we say, okay, we never know everything. We're not perfect. But how do we best prepare ourselves for everything so that when something out of left field or from, halfway around the world shows up, that you're able to respond to it and do it effectively?
Well, that's great advice, to always keep learning, and that's what we try to do here on ThreatTraq Essentials. So thanks for sharing all that advice. If you want to keep learning and keep hearing this great advice, please like and subscribe below. And if you want to take a deeper look at any of these stories, click on the playlist below. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.